morning and good. Well, okay, I've lost my video. That is not good. So, okay, let's do this again. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our latest Indica Books author Q&A. We have with us, as you can see in my background, we have author Aditi Banerjee, and she has come out with a wonderful collection of short stories titled Hindu Love Stories Dharmically Ever After. And it's a collection of love stories from our epics, from our Puranas, from our literature. And before I invite Aditi to the studio, I will do a quick introduction of her. So, she is, you may already have read her first book that was released in 2019, The Curse of Gandhari. And as the title suggests, the book was on Gandhari, her life, her journey, and the curse obviously referred to the curse that she pronounced on Lord Krishna at the end of the Mahabharat war on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And the Telegraph India had written in a review that the most interesting part of the book is the relationship between Gandhari and Krishna, and Banerjee explores the duality of the power structure between the two. The shifting nature of their equation is skillfully examined. The Financial Express had in a review in the Financial Express had said that the narrative that is of the book also reveals to us that during that time each woman possessing a strong individuality and an equally strong viewpoint had the complete freedom to do what they wanted to do. And the Pune Mirror had said that this is an unconventional heroine of strength and strong will, of course. So a few weeks back, Aditi published her second book, Hindu Love Stories, and this is a collection of more than 25 stories from, as I said, from the different epics, Puranas, even from the Rigveda. And I have been, I spent the last time going through, I think I'm about at the halfway mark of the book. Fascinating collection, and I have a lot of questions to ask Aditi about this book. So, without further ado, I will invite Aditi to this webcast. Welcome, Aditi.
Namaste. Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, likewise, likewise. So, I won't ask you the obvious question as to, why did you write this book? Because given your interest in the epics and your first book, which was on Gandhari, it was in many ways, I think, natural or in some ways, in many ways. But I'll still ask you, tell us the gamut of characters that you have selected in this book for inclusion, because you have a lot of stories from the Mahabharata. You even have a couple of stories that have their origins or which find mention in the Rigveda. So, and obviously from the Puranas. But tell us a little bit about how you went about collecting or identifying which stories to include.
So it was there are a lot of stories to choose from, so I couldn't include all of them. But what I wanted to do is really pick stories that show a unique Hindu or dharmic perspective on love, because I think nowadays, if we say the word love or love story, we think of like a very Western, like modern, kind of very simplistic fairy tale idea of something happily ever after and things like that. So I wanted to select stories that really show this different worldview, a different ethos, a different set of values, and that also just show the richness of thought in Hinduism. So I started with some of my favorite stories, and then also stories that are not as well known. Stories that people perhaps may not be familiar with. So, for example, there's a story of Agastya and Lopamudra, which is there in the Rig Veda, but then there's a different or adapted version in the Mahabharata. And many of these stories have their origins in the Vedas, but then they expand and grow over time as they come into the Puranas and the Itihasa. So I thought just tracing that evolution was also interesting. And then, so there are stories from the Hindu texts, but then also stories from Hindu history. So, for example, the story of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his second wife, Vishnu Priya Devi, which is very much celebrated in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and is a beautiful story. Then there's also the story of Pamati. So Pamati, the wife of Sri Vachaspati Mishra, who was a renowned Advaita scholar and wrote a very famous commentary, and it was actually named after Pamati. So there's a very interesting story there, where you have a scholar who he was determined to take sannyas, and he had no interest in married life. But even knowing that Pamati wanted to marry him and to support him, and so it's a story of how she actually supports him, and he almost actually literally forgets her existence. But at the end, after he finishes writing his text, he realizes that he was only able to do so because every day she was lighting the lamp for him. She was leaving aside a little bit of food and milk for him, and doing all these things, making sure there were fresh, palm leaves for him to write on. And because she did all this, he realizes that was the only reason he was able to compose the text. And then, as an ode or an homage to her, he names the text after her, and he says, "Let the world remember you, but not me." And actually, today you know the name Pamati, but you may not know his name. So there are many fascinating stories like that. So from Hindu history as well.
It is. And, when you talked about some of the lesser known stories, in fact, I think not many, well, okay, a lot of people have, obviously, Hindus know the word Ardhanarishwar, but the story behind that in itself is fascinating. And you begin your book with that first story.
Yes, I think I had to begin there because the Shiva Shakti principle is like the foundation of the Hindu cosmic view, and all of that. So I couldn't think of any other way to start it but with their story. And so there are different versions of the origins of Ardhanarishwara, and so I thought that was interesting to explore.
Now, let me talk about your eighth story, Pururavas and Ulvashi. A lot of us know about Urvashi from the Mahabharata, and specifically when Arjun goes to Indralok to, and he spends about, I think, 5 years there. And at the end of it, uh, when Urvashi goes to Arjun, he basically, he says that, I cannot be with you because in some ways you were the wife of Pururavas, my ancestor. So, the relationship between the two of us is more of a mother and son, and I can only see you as one. And then she flies into a rage and she curses him. But that is what most of us know. The Pururavas story actually has its origins in the Rigveda, right?
Yes. Yes, it does, and it's a very short hymn from the Rig Veda, and it's basically Pururavas is they had some interlude of time on Earth, and it begins with now Urvashi is going away to Swarga basically, and Pururavas is basically pursuing her, and he is trying to win her back, or to remind her of their happy time together, and he's very distraught at the idea of her leaving. And Urvashi is actually very cold may not be the right word, but she basically said, we had our time together, now let me go. You're supposed to be a king, you're supposed to be this great warrior. You should be focusing on that. And then she's going to have his son, and it's this dialogue between the two of them. And so that's where the Rig Vedic reference comes from, and there are some cryptic lines in there which are taken very literally. So there's a story of when why they were separated. So basically, it says Urvashi had agreed to go with him and to stay with him on a few different conditions, and then those conditions are broken, and that's why she's coming back. So the interpretation of that in the Rig Veda is different from what you find in the Mahabharata and some other sources.
Correct. And so, in such a story where you have perhaps the earliest reference in the Rigveda, which is obviously a much earlier text than, say, the Mahabharata, and then you find some elaboration of it in the Mahabharata. I think another example is that of Lopamudra and the sage Agastya.
Hmm.
There in the Aranyak Parv of the Mahabharata, there is actually an quite a bit of elaboration on that particular story, right from the creation of a Lopamudra by Rishi Agastya to how he then goes to Ilval and how Vatapi is digested and so on. How did you go about structuring a coherent story from two narratives which may or may not always fit in a line very nicely? You have to do some amount of, you have to exercise some amount of discretion and in terms of what you want to include and how you, if you want to make some changes, how did you do that?
So in this book, what I really wanted to do was just show these stories from their original sources. So other than just some very minimal stylistic adaptation, I didn't change or cut anything out. And so I really did think it was fascinating to see how these stories evolve. So in the Rig Veda, there's basically again a hymn where Lopamudra is addressing her husband, Agastya Muni, and Lopamudra, in her own right, she's a seer of some of the Vedic hymns. She's very renowned, and she's basically saying to her husband, "You are so devoted to your austerities, but remember, I am also here. I am your wife, and men should also be with their wives." And Agastya Muni agrees, and the last verse is actually one of his students admiring how Agastya Muni is both so devoted to his austerities and also to his wife. So it's the celebration of both aspects of life, which is it's a very beautiful thing. In the Mahabharata, as you say, this is much more expanded upon, including how Lopamudra came to be, how, in a sense, Agastya Muni created her, taking the most beautiful part of all these different animals and creating them together because he could not find a wife, suitable to be his wife. And then they're together, they're happy for a time, and then one day he wishes to be with her. And then Lopamudra says, "No, but I want it to be a beautiful setting. I want you to be decorated. I want to be decorated. It should have this, romantic, um, uh, you know, environment." And he doesn't say no. He doesn't reject. He says, "Okay, then I have to go find the wealth so that we're able to do this." But at the same time, he is also very determined that this be done in a dharmic way, in the sense that wherever he collects money from the different kingdoms, it should not cause harm. Meaning, if you're taking money from the kingdom, it shouldn't mean that any of the subjects are suffering or the kingdom, the treasury is suffering. So he goes to many different kings, and then he finds out, and in all of those cases, he says to take the money from them, even if the kings are willing to do so, would be causing harm. So I will not do so. And then finally, he goes to Ilwala, and they have the story of Vatapi and all of that. So again, it's also the same celebration of this great Muni who's devoted to austerities, but then also embracing this other aspect of life and the grihastha ashram in a sense. So I find the underlying worldview and principles are the same. It's just much more elaborated and given a lot more expansive treatment in the Mahabharata than it is in the Vedas.
Right. And you somewhere in the, I think, the first half of your book, you talk about the different types of marriages, starting with the Brahma form of marriage down to the Peshach, and you write that the Peshach marriage is frowned upon. It is it is the worst form of marriage, yet it was recognized as such so as to protect the rights of the woman who was thus call it what you will, forcibly married, or in basically in not a in a way that does not have the sanction of any of any society, but yet it was given the recognition simply because it would help protect the rights of the woman. So this was interesting because in the question that I had is that have you come across such a marriage in our texts? Because if it is referring to it, there should or there might have been, an occurrence of such an incident.
Yeah, I cannot think of any offhand. The closest that comes is actually when Shri Krishna takes the women who are being imprisoned, and he marries them, to kind of save their honor. But that's different because in that case he's rescuing them. But the idea was that as you say, that if there's been a forcible like rape or intoxication where a woman is taken against her consent, that again should not be advised. But if it happens, then sometimes in certain circumstances it was allowed to be recognized again to give the woman her rights. I I really cannot think of an example of that where that happened and it was condoned as a marriage as such. So, but I'll think about it.
Similar to on the same lines, then I have this question on Subhadra and Arjun. Uh, it is not, it is, I think, what a Gandharv form of a marriage. It is also similar to Rukmini and Krishna, though in the case of Rukmini, she actually sends out a messenger, a Brahman, to Krishna with a very, and I think you've reproduced a lot of that. What she writes in that letter. It's a very forthright, very open kind of professing of love for Krishna. So it's Rukmini is a very very bold and free woman in that respect. That even though her father wanted to, Rukmak wanted her to be married to Shishupal, she wouldn't have any of that. She
Yes, it's that was another thing I really enjoyed about writing this book, is we have this sense that traditional Hindu women were very meek and passive and were just victims of circumstance. And then if you read any of these stories, it's so completely not the case. So Rukmini simply hearing of the stories of Sri Krishna when people would come to the palace and describe him, just from hearing that she falls in love with Sri Krishna, and she decides he's the only one suitable to be her husband, and she wants to marry him. And so she writes this very forthright, direct letter that she sends with a Brahmana messenger to Dwaraka. And in that letter, she talks about the different qualities one should look for in one's spouse, and how they would be a good match. And it's a very intelligently written letter. Like it's not just emotional. She's actually describing the different qualities, and also describing herself. And she says not only that, but she actually tells him, if you agree to this, you may be wondering how you can come and take me away without causing a lot of violence. So let me tell you that on the morning of the marriage date, I will be going on a procession to a temple of Devi, and at that time, that would be the opportune time for you to come and take me away. So this is the level of her in intelligence, strategic thinking, and all of that. And again, being very, very forthright. So I thought it was important to just include that, because I think it gives you an appreciation for the nuance and depth to which our women are depicted in Hinduism.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, in relation to your seventh story, which is Menka and Vishwamitra, the daughter that results from that union is Shakuntala. And if one reads the Mahabharata, Shakuntala is one of the strongest characters I have read about in any of our epics. I mean, she's the one who, after when she decides that it is time for her son Bharat to be taken to meet his father uh, Dushyant, and when Dushyant refuses to recognize her, she's no timid or meek woman. She basically, I mean, she gets up and and gives Dushyant the shock of his life. He says that she tells him that your stature is like a bilva seed. I am like a mountain compared to you. I mean, one has to take one's hats off to that lady for the kind of pride and self-respect that she displays. And this is somewhat of a contrast from what Kalidas wrote
Mm.
in his play, but nonetheless I think that's the sense of agency that was with women in our epics, I think, is something that is often overlooked when these characters are painted in very, very broad strokes. Even, Draupadi's character is a fascinating one. But uh, tell me a little bit about. See, I'll go to some of the lesser known stories. Uh, so
I just
tell
want to
me.
add one thing
Yes,
on
please.
Shakuntala, because it's very fascinating about her. Like you said, she really gives him. I mean, her words are so sharp at that point, and she talks about how Menaka is this is the first among the apsaras, and who are you to even because he makes some derogatory comments about her mother
Exactly.
and Menaka, and she says she's the first and foremost of apsaras. How dare you talk about her? And she is actually willing to take Bharat and walk away from the
Exactly.
kingdom, and he kind of has to take her back, and then she again is the one who chooses whether to go back with him or not. So yeah, so very, very true.
Just fascinating. So I was going to ask you about. Uh, See, the story. We'll come to the story of Savitri and, in particular, Ruru and Pramadwara, because I
Mm.
think it brings out a very, very. I think I haven't come across a similar incident in the Mahabharata. But before that, tell us about Leela and Padma.
Yes. So this is just a very interesting story from Vasishta Yoga, and it's a very extended parable where you have Queen Leela and King Padma, and they have like a happy married life together, and then but Queen Leela is always worried about her husband passing away and that she will not be able to live without him. So even while they are alive and well, even while he is well, she is very concerned about this, and she can't accept the thought of losing him. And so then what happens is she goes to all of the ministers. She asks for help. She asks for a way, some yagya or something by which her husband and she can be united, for forever. And of course, that's not possible. And then she undertakes a vrata and she worships Saraswati Devi, and she asks her for help. And Saraswati Devi basically promises to come when she calls her, and that she will help her. But she gives her a very cryptic blessing, so she doesn't say that he is going to live forever or anything like that. And then what ends up happening is he's wounded in battle, and he dies. And then Leela calls upon Saraswati Devi to come and to bring him back to life. And then they go on a journey to very various worlds, various lokas and things like that. And in different versions of these parallel realities, there's the same Leela and Padma in different manifestations. And it's actually a parable for understanding the nature of existence, of reality, of what it means to have a name and form. And so through that, Leela actually becomes enlightened. And so it's a fascinating story because this is a very extended part of Yoga Vasishta, but what's interesting is you start with this very human emotion of not wanting to be separated from your beloved, and how that becomes a starting point for this spiritual journey, and this understanding of basically Advaita Vedanta. And that's what's really fascinating. And you find this in a lot of different stories from our Hindu texts, where you take something human, like a human emotion, like love, and then you spiritualize it, or you take that to viveka and vairagya, and understanding the metaphysical reality between it, and transcending some of these emotions. So,
Interesting, interesting. Uh, I want I want to also get into some questions about the process of writing, publishing, and so on. But before that, as I said, I do want to ask you about the story of Ruru and Pramadwara. This comes from the Adi Parva of the Mahabharata, and I think it's in the Astik Parva, if I'm not
mhm.
mistaken, or one of the very
Yes.
early Parvas, Upa Parvas. But tell our viewers about the story. I was absolutely fascinated by it.
So it was interesting, and I wanted to couple that with the story of Savitri. So many of us are familiar with the basic story of Savitri, who basically has an extended discussion with Yamadeva in an effort to bring her husband back to life, and she is successful in doing so. And nowadays, this has been interpreted as some kind of a patriarchal system where a woman is just doing something because for the sake of her husband, or something like that, or this idea that a woman has to sacrifice herself for her husband, even though the actual story of Savitri is really nothing like that. But that's what it's come to be represented. But no one really talks about Ruru and Pramadwara. So this is another story where Pramadwara is the daughter of a Gandharva and an Apsara, and she's kind of left behind on Earth, and she is raised by this rishi. And Ruru sees her and falls in love with her. And it is agreed that they will get married. But before they can get married, she is struck by a snake bite, and she dies. And in short, what happens is Ruru is inconsolable, and then he basically he makes a bargain. So there's a messenger comes from Yamadeva, and he basically makes this bargain that Yamadeva accepts, that he will give up half of his life for Pramadwara to be revived. And so this, where you have the man giving up half of his life for the sake of his wife, like, this isn't discussed. Many people don't know about this, and so I thought it was interesting to bring that up. And then also, what's interesting about this story is after this happens, he just bears this hatred for snakes. And he comes across this Dunduva snake, and he actually wants to strike it and attack it. And then that snake talks to him and then says, it's not right for you to do so. And so there's this dialogue that begins. But I thought that was it's a fascinating story. And this is what happens when we don't read our text, and we're just relying on some of these very politicized ideological interpretations, which are very misleading. And so we have to really go back and rediscover our texts.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And from the point of storytelling itself, a lot of the tellings of the Mahabharata, they basically pick up an arbitrary point at which they start the story. Some of them started from Shantanu. Some of them start a little earlier. But the way the Mahabharata begins, it takes in three, four, five absolutely disparate threads, and how it weaves them together, I think, in itself is storytelling at its best. I don't know why more people don't talk about it, but I think it was absolutely fascinating to me how it brings everything together. And the fact that Ru- uh, Ruru and Pramadwara were the husband. They were, I don't think they were even married, right? They were
No,
betrothed to be
they're
married. They were
betrothed.
not
Yes.
married.
Yeah.
And then after the snake bite, he says, I'm willing to give half my life. That is again something that, as you said, the politicized and very very ideologically colored, painted the narratives on our epics very conveniently omit that. And even with Savitri, uh, Ashwapati, Savitri's father,
Mm.
He basically tells her, go out and select your own husband. And
Yeah.
she comes back and she says, I have selected Dumat Sen's son, Satyavan, the king.
Satyavan.
He was a king. He's no longer a king. They live in penury, poverty in the forest. And I've selected him as Satyavan as my husband. And Narad says that he has got 1,001 qualities, but it's a horrible choice. And
Yes.
then, and
And
she,
she is. Oh, sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
no, no,
No,
please
no,
go ahead.
no, I was saying what's interesting is after Narada Muni informs them that he is fated to die in 1 year, King Ashwapati actually tells her, go find someone else. So even
Exactly.
in the beginning, what King Ashwapati says is like he can't even find a man worthy of being married to his daughter. So he says, you go and find someone. So again, that agent's there, and she goes off for some time, and she comes back. But then even after she finds out about the curse, again she's given the choice that she can go find someone else to marry. But then she says no, she has chosen him, and whatever comes, she will not deviate from that choice. And this is what I think a lot of people miss out upon is without that agency, if she was simply forced to marry Satyavan, then the story of Savitri would never come to be. Because if you don't have choice, if you're just a victim, then you can never be a heroine. You can never be really, you can't even exercise the Purushartha by which you fulfill your dharma. So in all these stories, there is a basic agency. It may not be, complete freedom to do whatever one wants, because there are always constraints. Even today, we have constraints. We can't just do whatever we want. But within the constraints of our life, we do have fundamental choices, and that's what determines who we are. And the other thing I would say about Ruru and Pramadwara is that's a lesser known story. But even if you take the story of the Ramayana and Sri Rama, and now people say, he was so cruel to Sita, and he was just a bad husband. Um, but if you read the Valmiki Ramayana, it's very clear once Sita has been abducted, Sri Rama is completely inconsolable. He can't even function. He is just he's distraught. He's just he's almost like brooding. He's crying. He can't do anything. And it's really Lakshmana who has to rouse him and says, "No, we have to take action. Get yourself together." But this is the depth of Sri Rama's love for Sita. And even after she is, banished to the forest, he never takes another wife. So these kinds of aspects are completely overlooked and very much distorted.
Exactly. I want to take, Arun's point and his comment when he writes that Savitri, come to think, is such a brave woman to go up against Yamdev himself. Yet her name is used to ridicule women as being subservient, to men. I think, if I'm correct, Arun meant to write subservient to men. And it's like saying that, the message going out to women who use Sati and Savitri in a derogatory sense is to say that the women, please don't have any agency of your own. Please don't have possess any presence of mind. Please don't have the courage, the guts to go up against Yamdev and get the better of him. I mean, I would like to see people try and say that, yeah, I'll go up against a god of death and I'll get the better of, him. I don't think it's really happened. The only other instance I know when that happened was with the Rishi Markandeya, who, ironically enough, is the one telling the story in the
Yes.
Mahabharata.
And Yamadeva is, he's not just like a lord of death. He's like Dharma Raja, right? So he represents Dharma, and yeah, there are a lot of these interpretations that Savitri tricked him, or things like that, which are completely not true. So if you think about the presence of mind of this woman who is so in love with her husband, and for a year every day she knows that this day is coming, and then when he is dead next to her, she doesn't just start wailing and weeping and all of that. When Yamadeva comes, she has the presence of mind to engage in this very long conversation with him. And she's not begging for her husband's life. In fact, she never even she doesn't ask for that until the end. But she's having a discourse with him on dharma, on what it means to have satsanga with noble people, the importance of things. And
Exactly.
Yamadeva isn't tricked. He's actually charmed. He says, people don't
He, he,
talk to
he
me.
says, yes. And he
Yes,
says, I am developing a strong sense of respect for you. This is what Yamraj says to Savitri. And see, I'm going to hijack this session, and I'm going to, this is so fascinating. The first boon that he grants her, he says, with the exception of your husband's life, ask me anything. And she says, my father-in-law is blind. Please let
yes,
his eyesight be restored. The second boon, Yamraj again says that with the exception of your husband's life, ask for anything. And she says, let him get his kingdom back, and so on. The third boon, again with the condition that Yamraj puts in, she says that let my father, who has only one daughter, me, let him get 100 sons. The fourth one, she says that let me be, again, Yamraj has put the condition. The fourth boon that she asks for is let me be the mother of Satyavan's sons. We are
yes.
left with a very fascinating, point of debate there, that the Yamraj has, on the one hand, said that Satyavan isn't coming back to life, yet you will be the mother of his sons. Even at that point, Savitri doesn't tell Yamraj that how this is going to happen, because gods being gods, he could have come up with a loophole, and then Savitri would have been left high and dry. The fifth boon, he doesn't put a condition, and that's
Yes.
when she asks him, "I want Satyavan brought back to life."
Exactly.
I
And
mean,
she actually says, I already indirectly accomplished this with the previous boon, but now that you've done, this is what I would like. And it also shows that Yamadeva willingly gave this boon, right? Because the last time he doesn't put that condition, means he's so he
exactly.
admires her so much that he willingly foregoes the condition. And he even says throughout, like, I haven't had such intelligent conversation in so long. Your noble words are so pleasant to listen to. I want to keep talking with you, but you must, he keeps saying, you must go back, because she has been fasting, and going through
For
all
three
these
days.
austerities for 3 days. And then she's basically accompanying Yamadeva, who's carrying the Purusha of Satyavan. And it's a very, obviously, it's a very arduous journey. But yes, her strength and just the mutual respect between the two of them, between Yamadeva and Savitri, and how she, through this one woman, also King Ashwapati's kingdom is restored. Her own father's dynasty. He has many sons. She basically becomes the savior for both families, and brings back her husband. So this is what Savitri was meant to represent. So when Sri Aurobindo composed his poem on Savitri, the inspiration that he gets from this is really what it is. But nowadays, in these feminist retellings, it's a very ridiculous, very like simplistic and just completely distorted reading, that has no resonance with the actual original text.
Exactly. So I would strongly suggest that once you have read this story of Savitri in Aditi's book, please do go back to the Mahabharata and read the full. It's not very long. If I remember, it's like about 300 shlokas.
Yeah.
The English translation will take up about 10 to 15 pages. It's a fascinating story. Let me ask you, coming back to your book, uh, tell us which are your favorite stories among the 27 that you have written on. Tell us a couple that you really enjoyed writing about.
So I really enjoy writing about Satyabhama. So I find Satyabhama is such an engaging character. She's so willful. She's just very spirited, and the story where where Sri Krishna takes her with him while he goes to fight Narakasura. And in this version of the story, which comes from the Hari Vamsha and certain versions of the Hari Vamsha, sh- he has this extended battle with Narakasura, and he actually gets injured. And Sri Krishna tells Satyabhama, who is with him, that I'm tired. I have to rest now. I'm a little bit tired. Can you fight for some time? And then she fights valiantly. She lands some really good blows, and everyone, there's actually a very there's a painting I've seen which I very much admire, which is uh, Shri Krishna is resting on the back of Garuda, and he's just watching in admiration as Satyabhama is shooting arrows at Narakasura. and she does an amazing job. And then as a gift, Aditi gifts her these earrings, and then Shri Krishna in the middle of the battle gives her a necklace that she had wanted from him for a long time. She had asked him for it before; he had never given it to her. But then he's so full of admiration, so he gives her this necklace. So this is very beautiful um, episode. It's this very heartwarming, and you have this love and affection between Shri Krishna and Satyabhama, and then also just this in the background of this battle. So again, this idea that of women on the battlefield being warriors and just being very spirited, and not in any way meek.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Uh, so, for those of you watching, we have been in discussions with Aditi Banerjee. She has come out with her latest book, Hindu Love Stories, Dharmically Ever After. This book is available as a Kindle ebook on Amazon. If you have a Kindle Unlimited subscription, it is available under that subscription also, so you can read it for free under that Kindle Unlimited subscription. There is a paperback also available. Indica Books has been working with Aditi's publisher, and we are procuring copies of her book, and we will be sending out some copies to people who have signed up for the Indica Books 1000 Reviewers Club 2022. So if you have not already signed up, I would encourage you to go check out our Twitter and Facebook handle and sign up for that. We still have a few spots left. We have had hundreds of people who have already signed up, and over the course of the next 11 to 12 months, we will be sending out 5,000 books to the 1,000 people who sign up. All we ask for is that you read those books and you leave a review on Goodreads, on Amazon, and share links on our on social media sites. We absolutely do not insist that you write negative review. I mean, you write only positive reviews. If you don't like a book, be absolutely feel free to write a negative review, criticize it, give us your reasons why you didn't like the book. But we have no obligations from you other than that you read and review the book. Now, with that small blurb out of the way, let's talk about the craft of writing, because in almost every such interaction, I do want to get and probe our authors a little bit on how they write, because everyone writes, they have a different way of approaching writing, how they do their research, their outlining, their editing, their revisions, and so on. Some people write in the morning, some people write in the evening or late at night. Some people, like me, think about writing more than they actually end up writing. But tell us a little bit about your approach to writing.
Sure. So, what was interesting is writing this book was actually, it felt very easy for me. The reason it felt easy is because I didn't see myself as really writing it. So one of the main purposes for this is bringing the original text, but just making it accessible. So, as you said, Abhinav, it's we have the story of Savitri here. It's really taken, adapted directly from the K.M. Ganguly translation of the Mahabharata, which is unabridged. And what I did try to do was capture some quotes that show the original English of what he wrote. And the hope is really, if you read that, then you realize, sometimes if you look at all the volumes of the Mahabharata together, it looks overwhelming. But if you just read these little stories, then you see it's not very intimidating. And the hope is someone would go to the original, read them, and then go back. Same for like the Srimad Bhagavat and other texts. So in that sense, just writing this and just adapting this to a kind of a modern retelling, I actually found it very enjoyable, and it was fun to do. The other side of what I do in terms of writing fiction, one thing that I've realized is you can't do a lot of things at once. So I find if I'm writing, like sometimes I'll say, okay, I'm going to write 500 words today or 1,000 words today, and while I'm writing, it's kind of like I'm writing what I'm thinking. So I'm trying to think of like, what's the plot movement that's happening? What is the setting like? And I'm kind of writing to myself and like building up the setting as I'm writing it. And then when I go back and read it as a reader, that's not really what you want to see. So there's a lot of thinking, and I think like the plotting and immersion into point of view that has to go even before you actually write a scene. Um, and then what I find the most enjoyable part is really immersion into that point of view. And that's where I think writing becomes very powerful. So it's something that other mediums like film and TV can't do, because you're just watching what's happening. But what's really unique about writing is you can actually have that internal point of view, or that the interior of the character. And so what I've realized lately is that it really helps to spend a lot of time thinking about the plotting, the world building, what the character arc will be. I've started trying to use apps like Plotter and Scrivener to kind of do that work. And then when I'm writing, it should just be kind of focused on the style, the point of view, and just the trying to write lyrically, or those kinds of things. But really, that you have to kind of do these things almost like one at a time. So my writing process has actually become longer than it was before, because I never used to think about these things. But especially, we have those open house sessions with Otis Hashemeyer, which I really recommend that people join. But this is a wonderful initiative that Indica makes available to anyone who's willing to sign the pledge, which is every Sunday we have this 1 hour, 1.5 hours with Otis, who's just a master of the craft and an incredibly good teacher. But taking these sessions with him, just having an appreciation for the craft, for the importance of craft. And there's a lot that you don't see when you're reading a book and you're just enjoying a book, but what actually goes into making that book enjoyable. So I feel like it's just a never-ending process of learning. But I think it's trying to make that time to every day to work on the writing process, which it may not just be writing words, but whether it's brainstorming or something else like that, and understanding what makes literature good. Um, Another thing that I've discovered is, when I wrote The Curse of Gandhari, I always thought the target audience would be people, who are Indian or of Indian background, or are Hindu, and who can, who can have interest in the Mahabharata. But I was working with a writing coach at that time who was from the U.S. and had no connection with India, and she really loved the book, and she said, the part where Gandhari has this very difficult birth, that goes, her pregnancy goes longer for a year, and all of that she could really relate to that as a mother. And I think one of the most important jobs we have as a writer is taking something that's a very individual or unique or specific experience and making it universal, so that everyone can relate to it. But yeah, so those are some of my thoughts.
No, you're very right. There's so many aspects to writing that we often don't think about when reading a book, especially if we read a good book. We just know it's a good book. But I think when any of us takes a stab at writing, when it is our turn to become the creator, I think all of these things come into play. And whether we so you touched on a lot of them, point of view and the plotting, and using tools to help with the plotting, the editing, and so on. On the point of view, Arun Krishnan has a very interesting question, and he asks, did you try and put yourself into the character's mind? Because, for example, in the Satyabhama story, the story itself can't be tampered with.
Yes. So in general, so this book is a little bit different because I didn't try to do like these were just like what I would consider like retelling. So you have like the story as it's presented in the Srimad Bhagavata, or the Harivamsha, and just and just conveying that. I didn't do it the way like a modern story where you put yourself into, whether it's like a first person point of view or third person point of view, and trying to get into the interiority, because it can be very difficult. So when I wrote The Curse of Gandhari, I did spend a lot of time putting myself into her mind. and then also try to do it in a way that doesn't distort what's actually there in the Mahabharata. And it's difficult because I think you have to be first and foremost respectful of the original text or the original tradition from where that story comes from. So so there are certain things that, as you say, cannot be tampered with, including not just the events and plot points, but also just the underlying characteristics, personality, and ethos of that. So I think first and foremost is familiarizing oneself with the original, trying to understand what's the ethos, what are the lessons, what's the messaging that's there, staying consistent with that, and then within those constraints, imagining yourselves within the space of the character, and filling in some of the space between the lines.
Fascinating. And, that leads me to the next question. And this has been posted by S. Anuradha. Do you plan to expand any of these stories into a novel?
Uh, not at this time. There were some stories that I didn't include that I think could be novels in their own rights. But on these particular stories, not at this time. Um, but I think there is a lot of scope for further exploration of each of these. So they're just very fascinating, fascinating stories. So you'd ask me for some of my favorite stories from the collection. So there's another one that comes from the Tripura Rahasya, where you have this couple, Hemaleka and Hemachuda. And Hemachuda is a prince, and Hemaleka is his wife, and he's very in love with her. And but he notices she doesn't seem to be as into him, and then he asks her, and then she actually she's enlightened, and she basically enlightens him through a series of dialogues and interactions. So I think there's a lot of scope there, but what I think is more important than necessarily taking these stories and making them into novels is bringing out what I'd call like an Indic way of thinking into different stories. So nowadays it's become very important in the West to have what they call representation. So representation of different races, of different sexualities, of differently abled people, and all of that is good. But it's very kind of superficial in the sense that it's about just having a representation. So maybe you have like a Black person, but then the fundamental story and the fundamental values and the fundamental way of storytelling is just the Western way. So you're just taking people who look different and just telling the same story. So what I would really like to see is the underlying principles or values of these stories, bringing those into literature. And so it can be through expansion of stories from the Puranas and the Itihasa, or it can be new stories, it can be contemporary stories, but telling them from a different perspective, a different point of view, because that's what I think is really, really lacking. For all that we say about diversity and multiculturalism, it's still very much a Western homogenous type of worldview and value system that gets presented. I remember someone had written a book about like Bengali folk tales and turned them into stories for young adults. And she was making the point when she was writing the story, she had a scene where this young girl, this young Indian American girl, comes into the house and she runs up the stairs with her sneakers on, and then she thought to herself, but in reality, if you're like of an Indian household, you take your shoes off. You wouldn't be wearing shoes inside the house. But we're so conditioned in the way that we've all kind of grown up reading, Western books or watching American shows. So we always just think of these things, and we don't stop to think, well, no, in our worldview, in our culture, that wouldn't happen. So I'm not going to write about that. So I think that's the important part of bringing this voice and this perspective and this philosophy to all the stories that we write.
So true. So many things to unpack, and so many aspects of storytelling. Uh, did I lose my audio? I hope
Now
I
I can hear you. You
am.
you broke up.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think my
I can hear you now, but you broke up for a.
intermittent issue. Okay, okay. No, so I was saying so many issues to unpack and so many things that we often end up overlooking when we read these stories. But I would like to thank you, Aditi, for the time that you've spent today in talking to us and in sharing your thoughts on these different stories and what drove the inspiration that led to the selection of 27 stories. So the book is Hindu Love Stories Dharmically Ever After. It's been published in 2022. It's available on Amazon as a Kindle ebook. A paperback version is also available. Aditi's first book was The Curse of Gandhari, which was published in 2019. So I would strongly encourage all of you to go get a copy, read it, leave your comments, leave a review, leave a rating. Often enough, I think what a lot of us don't truly appreciate is that authors get their inspiration as also publishers appreciate if a book is read. And one way, if you've read a book, is to leave feedback, because that is what helps other readers who might be looking at your book make up their minds as to whether they want to get this or not. So definitely do not underestimate the value of even a short 5-line review that you may end up leaving on a site like Amazon or Goodreads. Uh, my name is Abhinav Agarwal, and of all the different ways, here are some of the different ways in which you can associate and get and interact with Indica and Indica Books. You can follow us on Twitter at Indica Books. You can join our Facebook group at group/Indic Book Club. You can sign up for the 1,000 Reviewers Club that I talked about earlier in the session, where we will send out 5,000 books. That is 5 copies per person. There's some fine print and all, but generally that's what we are going to do over the course of the year. You can as Aditi mentioned, you can send writing samples, because every one of us wants to improve our writing. We all want to write. I mean, at the core of it, we are all storytellers. From the time we are born and we learn how to listen and hear, we want to hear stories. We tell stories. So if you want to improve, if you want to learn the craft of writing, if you have the passion, trust me, there's a process to writing. You can submit writing samples and every Sunday evening at I think 8 p.m. A Stanford fellow, Otis Hashmeyer, he goes over your writing samples, gives you feedback, talks in general about the art and craft of writing. Cannot be missed. Very, very valuable. And obviously join these Indica Books Q&As. And with that, I will leave the last word to you, Aditi.
Now, I would just say I wouldn't have written either of these books if it wasn't for Indica. So, several years ago, Indica sponsored these writing workshop with Otis. It gave master class passes on writing and various classes, and then just connecting with this wonderful community of writers writing about Indic themes, like that community and that support from Indica is what gave me the courage and the inspiration to write my first book and keep writing. So I cannot say enough about getting involved with Indica. And the only other thing I would say is all the proceeds from the book sales for this book will be donated to Hindu causes. So including there's a charity that works in Vrindavan that supports widows in Vrindavan. So I did just want to say that. So all proceeds will be contributed to different Hindu causes.
Thank you so much, Aditi, and thank you all for listening. This conversation will be available on Indica Books YouTube channel, and we till we talk to you next time. Thank you so much, and namaskar.